Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar today, Tourism and Hospitality Sector, the Challenges and Solutions. It's nice to see so many people come along and feel it's a valuable use of their time today. I'm very much sure that it will be. Just to introduce myself, my name is Simon Ovenden. I am the Policy Advisor for Access and Visitor Management, Scotland and the States. Very briefly about my background, I've got about 25 years of managing heritage and outdoor visitor sites across the UK. I was the Estates Manager of the National Trust for Kent and South East London, then moving off the borders, and I worked for the National Trust of Scotland as their General Manager for Aberdeenshire, and most latterly with Crown Estate Scotland as the Countryside Manager for Glenlivet Estate. So I have a reasonable amount of experience on the tourism and visitor access side of things. What I would like to do is just go through a little bit of the housekeeping, if I could, just to make sure that hopefully we get things right. Jane, who is our guru in the background, will be making sure that the various slides will appear in the right running order, I am certain. Just to let us know that we are recording the meeting, and all attendees will have access to the various features that you can see on the slide in front of you just now. In the far left corner, it's a microphone which lets you speak, so mute and unmute. If you're not speaking at the time, it would help to avoid feedback if you could keep your microphones on mute. And there's also a start and stop video button. If you do or do not wish to be seen, they're entirely your choice. Then just moving on, there's also a participants icon. The next slide, please, Jane, which is there, and that lets participants interact. So if you just click on the small window, a list of people in the meeting will open up, and with links to the buttons to push either yes or no. And there's also reactions, so you can clap your hands and you can agree to something with thumbs up. You may notice that there is no thumbs down button. That hasn't been removed by ourselves. That's just a Zoom, but I'm sure there won't be any thumb down today. If you do wish to ask a question, there is the chat function as well in the meeting controls, and Jane and I will have access to the messages. So then when we actually come to the Q&A sessions, we can either pick up messages from the chat, or if you wish to, you can raise your hand when we're in the Q&A session, and you can then forward the questions however appropriate. So really just as an opening sort of comment, so tourism and hospitality, it's had unprecedented changes in the last 18 months. We've gone from a distinct lack of visitors through COVID to almost overwhelming visitor numbers in some areas. Many of them are new to the countryside and also unaware of what responsible access actually means. It's been huge changes and challenges for land managers, right through from fires to dirty camping and to social behaviour. But we've also managed to welcome some really incredible new visitors to our areas, and that's also we've obviously very much appreciated. And all of this is at a time when some very well-established businesses could potentially be facing closure, with new threats on the horizon with our rural economy, and I'm particularly relating to short-term lets, and we'll hear a little bit more about that later. With the speakers, I'm delighted that we've got a terrific speaker panel with us here today. Sir Edward Mountain, MSP for the Highlands and Islands, Pete Crane, Head of Visitor Services, the Cairngorms National Park Authority. We have Fiona Campbell, Chief Executive of the Association of Scotland Self-Caterers, and also Jordan Hewitt, who's Head of Brand and Content at VisitScotland. We also have two special advisors who are not actually presenting, but will be there for the Q&A session and are able to answer any questions you might have on any specific or their specific fields. And that's Alan Dron, who's Police Scotland's National Crime Rural Crime Coordinator, and also Mark Reitman from Nature Scott, who is their Recreation and Access Manager. So we'll just about sort of get underway and with the first presentation, which is going to be Cerebral Mountain. And all of the presentations are going to be sort of between about 10 to 12 minutes or something like that. And at the end of each presentation, there will be a short time, sort of 3 to 5 minutes for any really, really burning questions you might have. Can't wait for the next session, which will come at the end. We'll have about half an hour, although it can be extended if necessary. But if there's anything really burning you want to ask immediately, then we'll just have those few minutes there. And if you could put those requests in the chat or at the end of the presentation, just raise your hand and we'll follow through with that. So with no more ado, I'll introduce Cerebral Mountain, a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Highland and Islands region. He's one of the 7 regional MSPs for the region, and having been re-elected in May of this year. Edward's area of interest, they include healthcare provision in Highlands, improving infrastructure, and renewing the Highlands for the state. Edward also supports a good, strong local economy and is passionate about agriculture and fisheries. So Edward, over to you.
Just got to remember to unmute first, so I think I've done that, so that's good. Thanks very much for that, Simon. And I'm delighted to be able to come and say about the Scottish Outdoor Access Code and whether it's time for a review. Now, those of us that remember when the Scottish Outdoor Access Code was introduced, which was in 2005, will know, and I think we're on to the next slide, hopefully. Let's see if I've got that right. Sorry, I'm not in control of my slides. Very dangerous for a politician not to be in charge of his talk, but I'm sure SLE have got it. So the Scottish Outdoor Access Code was introduced in 2005 after the land reform was introduced in 2003. And that was really a landmark period. And we went through 2 years of very tricky conversations between 2003 and 2005. And those of you that remember that period will remember the detailed argument about whether people could come into the curtilage of your house. No one's ever managed to explain what a curtilage of a house is, to my satisfaction, certainly not the legal team that taught me at college. But we went through a difficult period and we finally came out with a code, and it was based on the principle of respecting the interests of others, taking care for the environment, and taking responsibility for our own actions. And I summarize that very simply to say that you give and take access responsibly, and it's a two-way situation. Now, looking at the next slide, I think that what we need to bear in mind is the huge amount of Scotland that is available and opened up for access. I mean, I had no idea there were 52,000 miles of paths in Scotland. And there's a huge amount of people that take access to that. Now, Visit Scotland have suggested to me that it's 327 million visits to the outdoors each year. Now, I haven't been able to quantify that, what that actually means. Does that mean driving to a car park and going for a walk, or does it mean just driving to a car park? They say that 83% of all visits are for walking, but how far is that walking? Is it around the car park? Is it beyond that? And they also estimate there's a huge amount of money that comes in as a result of that access. Now, I've heard figures of £1.6 billion mentioned, but I'm not sure that I feel confident in those figures. We just don't know enough about how that access is taken. What we do know is that it is increasing. Looking to the future, what are the long-term issues for the Scottish Outdoor Access and the Access Code? I think the first one is a huge amount of underinvestment. Now, I've been trying to do some investigations into exactly what the investment is. And what we do know is that originally, when the Scottish Outdoor Access Code came into place, there was about £17 million being spent on outdoor access. I think that's on the next slide. And that then reduced to a low point of about 9.7 million in 2011 and 2012. And it's gradually increased again in 2012-13 to about 12 million. But we have no accurate figures on what the local authority are expending each year, but we know it's less than it was when they started. What we also know is that access officers working for local authorities have actually decreased. I mean, there were nearly, as you can see on the figures, 62 people working in 2005, 2006. Don't forget, there was that sudden buzz that the outdoor access code was here and we needed lots of people working, and gently decreased to 2015, 2016. And the problem is it's really difficult now to put an accurate figure on that. I've been trying to do this for the last few months, and it's just almost impossible. What we also know is that the monitoring of budgets on the next slide has decreased as well. And the Scottish Government only monitored the budgets for the outdoor access code for the first 10 years of the code, and they've really lost interest since then. And from 2016, we know that local authorities haven't really been monitored as far as their contribution is concerned. And I'm trying desperately hard to fill in the gaps, but probably suffice to say that despite doing FOIs on every single local authority, their information is patchy at the best. What we have managed to confirm, though, is that 15 of the local authorities have reduced the budgets for outdoor access. That's on the next slide. And 4 local authorities were spending more in the last 5 years. But that's not a great story. 4 of all of our local authorities, only 4. And we also understand that 4 local authorities just don't even have a budget for outdoor access. And all their departments that they had into outdoor access have been subsumed into larger departments and don't actually function. And we also know the number of local access officers continues to dwindle and has fallen in 11 local authorities. So in summary, I think you can say it's really disappointing that from a high point and from something we should have been proud of and should have had every opportunity to work, we have seen it go downhill. There have, however, been some good news stories. It's always important to point that out. We've seen on the next slide that there's a lot more use of seasonal rangers, most notably in the Highlands, East Lothian, Moray and Edinburgh. And the Scottish Rangers Association has identified that, sadly though, 149 rangers posts have been lost. And the SCRA estimate there are 30 to 35% fewer rangers in post than there was when the code actually was introduced. And all this is in light of the challenges that the outdoor access now is facing. So what we know is during the pandemic, the outdoor access has been a huge refuge for many people across Scotland. But there's been some, on the next slide, there's been some huge environmental impact due to visitors' numbers, especially at the honeypots. And I'm sure we're going to hear from the Cairngorms National Park Authority how that affects them. And if we don't, we can ask them. And we've seen a reduce in the awareness of the code. People don't know, as Simon said at the beginning, what the code means because it hasn't been promoted. And dirty camping, well, we all see dirty camping. We've all got experience of it, and it really is unacceptable. We've seen more instances of damage and litter being left in the countryside, and that can be anything from cans to bottles to the grey waste. I'm never quite sure why it's called grey waste, but it's very unpleasant that it's littered around, especially around our lay-bys in the Highlands. And the irresponsible behaviour on farmland. And if you don't believe that, that is why we had to have a bill in the last Parliament to control dogs in the countryside and sheep worrying. And we've also seen a complete lack of protection for the sensitive areas for wildlife from dogs during the highly important spring breeding periods. And you can think about those where the waders are, and the fact that in the first period of lockdown, i.e. the very original lockdown, waders did extremely well in the breeding season, but this has been challenged in previous years because there were so many dogs. Now, how do we go about addressing these challenges? And I want to talk about that a bit. And I submitted a motion for the Parliament, which is here. It's quite a long motion. I'm not going to dwell on it too long. All I would say is it achieved cross-party support. There therefore is an appetite to debate this, but I don't think it goes far enough. And I think we need to do more. And that's why I think a full review of the Scottish Outdoor Access Code is required. Now, Nature Scot are responsible for this. It is within their terms of reference. They have a responsibility to keep the code under review and to modify it from time to time. They have not done that as of yet. However, it's my opinion that because of the increased outdoor access that's going on, the Scottish Government really mustn't commit to a complete review of the code. Now, some of the things that I would like to see included within that code is I think there should be, first of all, not on this slide, but I think it's really important that we should have it in the school curriculum. I think children should be taught the Scottish Outdoor Access Code at school. I think there should be an improved budget. Don't forget, the original budget for launching the code was 1.5 million. We've never seen that sort of money spent again. So let's get the code reviewed. Let's improve a budget for raising adult awareness. I think there needs to be a huge amount of infrastructure investment, restoring the old infrastructure that's been allowed to collapse in the last 15 years that the access has increased. And I think there ought to be an annual budget for councils for fixing core and main paths, because at the moment, be under no illusion that core paths are put on the back burner by councils if something more important comes up. And I think we ought to consider responding to environmental needs. And by that, I mean creating temporary sensitive wildlife areas during springtime to allow breeding to take place of birds and mammals. What should it also include in my mind? I think there definitely should be more rangers raising awareness on the ground. The local access forums that were originally signed up to by lots of people have fallen into disarray. We need to fund them properly and we need to have more of them. I think we should have resource maps across Scotland so people can see where they could go and what they can see when they get there. Now, there are some people that will argue that this is available, but it's not available in any easily readable form by the many people who visit the countryside. And I think we also need to identify carrying capacity for areas. There is no point throwing everyone into a small area and damaging that area beyond repair because other people, or they can't be encouraged to go elsewhere. Now, I believe support's growing across the Parliament. I believe it's growing across Scotland. I've had meetings with Scottish Land and Estates, Mountaineering Scotland, Scotways, Ramblers Scotland. I've got meetings still to come with NFUS, the Cairngorms National Park Authority and the Loch Lomond. And then I'm going to go into stakeholder meetings. And my aim is to drum up support to make the countryside more accessible in the sense that it is accessible with care and attention by having a better Scottish outdoor access code. And I stress this, and I stressed it to everyone that I've spoken to. I'm not for limiting access. I'm for making access taken responsibly and given responsibly by all. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions, Simon.
Thank you, Edward. Thanks very much for that. Are there any immediate burning questions now off the back of Edward's great presentation there? I can't see anything in the chat at all just at the moment, and I can't see any hands raised. So Jane, I don't know if you can see any at all.
Sounds like they needed to be more controversial.
Okay, well, I have a question. You might have guessed that. The Countryside Code in England and Wales, it was updated in April of this year. And Tony Juniper, the chair of Natural England, commented, and I'm going to read this verbatim. With more people than ever before seeking solace in nature, this refresh could not come at a more crucial time. We want everyone to be aware of the code so people of all ages and backgrounds can enjoy the invaluable health and well-being benefits that nature offers while giving it the respect that it deserves. So my question is, do you think that Scotland and being native Scotland, Scottish government, do we think that Scotland, we're behind the curve in dealing with increasing challenges around responsible access that have been quite apparent over the last 18 months?
Okay, I absolutely do, because I right. The pandemic has proved the need for people to get out and to take confidence and enjoy the countryside. We have this wonderful opportunity at the moment to harness that and to make people do so responsibly. Now, the problem is that just saying we had a great system and accepting that it was a great system, which in 2005, I think it was forward-looking and I think it was quite progressive. It is no longer progressive. And my mailbox is full of people across the Highlands who are saying to me, they're bored of people coming up, they're bored of people trashing the countryside, leaving their rubbish there, and not enjoying and respecting the amenity of the countryside. Now, I want to get away from that, because I think that just by introducing people back to the outdoor access code, we can make it acceptable to everyone that people should be coming up here. We need their income in the Highlands, and we need to enjoy their visits, and they need to enjoy their visits. And so just before I go on that, I want to make one point, is that one of the reasons why I said that I want to see the outdoor access code taught in schools is I believe that children will influence their parents. And I think parents listen to what their children say. So if they come back and say, Mum, you shouldn't be dumping, or you shouldn't be having this barbecue here, it's the wrong place to have it because we've been taught it at school, parents will listen to that. So I think we need to start with the children, and we need to encourage them to encourage their parents. And that way everyone can enjoy the countryside. So yes, I think he's right, and we need to do more.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I had anticipated that may have been what I say, but it's great to hear you confirm that. So thank you very much. Are there any other sort of burning questions? Oh, there is one question that's just come up in here, and it is from Caroline Gould, Discover Scottish Gardens. And this is less a question, more of a point to raise, that there is a new charity, Scottish Geology Trust. We're looking at ways to work with the Scottish Government and other bodies on making Scotland's landscapes accessible, but to help everyone understand access through education about Scottish geology. Thank you, Caroline. That's great. Thanks very much. And there is another from Scottish Land and Estates. How do we break the notion of right to roam? This is a soundbite, but I think it's the biggest challenge to landowners. And this gives the notion that nowhere in Scotland is off limit to the public, where we know this is not the case. I think that's probably something more for the wider Q&A session at the end, because we do end up going down several rabbit holes there. We will come back to that, certainly. Just moving on, I'm just conscious a little bit of time, and I don't want to cut anybody short on their presentation. So thank you once again, Edward. I'll be handing over now to Pete Crane, who is Head of Visitor Services at the Cairngorms National Park Authority. I've had the pleasure of working with Pete over a few years whilst I was at Glenlivet Estate. He's, as I say, he's Head of Visitor Services for the authority, and is managing quite a significant team that I know are in place now, including rangers and access officers, whilst also working with various partners, including landowners across the national park, to ensure that visitors have safe, enjoyable, and they're able to have responsible access experiences across the whole of what is an incredibly stunning road. So with that, Pete, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Simon. If you could have the first slide, please. I'm going to speak for the next 10 minutes about the work that has collectively been done over the last 18 months in the Cairngorms National Park. It's not just the work of the Park Authority, as you'll see, it's the work of a range of partners as we went into lockdown and started reopening. Next slide, please. But first, a bit about the National Park. We're actually, it's our birthday tomorrow. We're 18 years old. 1st of September 2003, the park was designated. It's 4,500 square kilometres. That's Mallorca and Minorca put together with a bit of space. It's a big area. It's 6% of mainland Scotland. It's covered by 5 local authorities. And the organisation I work for owns and manages none of the land. Everything we do is in partnership. 3/4 of the land is in private ownership, 15% is charitable, NTS and RSPB are the main owners, and 10% is state managed, mainly Forestry and Land Scotland and Nature Scotland. We are the access authority and we employ a team of 3 access officers. If we can go on to the next slide. I said it's home to 18,500 of us, but it's also key to the economy of visitors. Last time we looked at this, it was over 40% of the economy. And we, over the last 18 years, have done a lot of work on finding out what visitors want. Every 5 years, we've done a year-long visitor survey across the national park, interviewing 2,500 visitors, asking lots of questions. The last survey finished in March of 2020, ironically, just as we went into lockdown. And a year and a half ago, 1/4 of our visitors, in fact, over 1/4 of our visitors were overseas. Nearly half were still from Scotland, but that ended in Easter of last year. What we don't think we've seen, or what we do think we've seen, is we still think we're seeing 2.1 million visitors or so coming to the national park. Population of 18,500, 2 million visitors. What our visitors used to want to do is basically enjoy the landscape and go for a walk. The third most popular thing was visiting attractions, and that clearly presented challenges last year. Walking, high-level walking and cycling, the obvious mountain sports were key. If we can move on to the next slide. Quite clearly, last Easter 18 months ago, we needed to work with people towards reopening. So we have and continue to host a series of meetings that overlap. We set up a tourism emergency response group that used to meet weekly. That was the industry. That was the Cairngorms Business Partnership, Visit Aberdeenshire, Visit Scotland, Murray Speyside, and the local authorities coming together weekly to look at how we went to reopening. That now is monthly. We also meet with key land managers and the tourism industry again, 2 weekly, next meetings tomorrow morning. And every quarter, we've met with local authority councillors, that's 1 meeting, community councillors, and a 3rd meeting with residents. And all of those meetings, we've shared collectively the work we were doing to prepare for reopening and during reopening, and also listen to the partners as to what was going well and what needed to go better. We can move on to the next slide. The Cairngorms Business Partnership and ourselves did a tremendous amount of work on positive communication. And last year we released Cairngorms Together, which was very much, I think, celebrating the previous slide, that we are all in this together. It's nearly half our economy. And we were asking people to know the latest guidance, to plan ahead, and building on what Edward said about being flexible, not going to the hotspots. We've now continued that Cairngorms Together and joined it to the national Respect, Protect and Enjoy. Last year, a lot of our messaging was challenging and basic. It was about what's open, about what public toilets were open, what car parks were open, about planning ahead and simply getting that information out to people. We as the Park Authority did a lot of work on promoting the community paths. We've got 666 miles of core paths promoted on 17 easy to read leaflets. And we know already we need to get that information onto the mobile phone. We're working on that to promote safe, responsible access. This year, Cairngorms Business Partnership have done great work on promoting what attractions are open, whether you need to book ahead. It's a key part of the visitor experience. And they've done some specific work on camper vans, where you're welcome to park your camper van and where you can dispose of your waste. The other thing we've tried to do is, because we think we've got a new audience, we think we've got an audience of residents and near residents who haven't visited as much before to the countryside, and we've worked on getting some videos out with young people presenting the video to young people. I think it's true that both the National Park Authority and the Cairngorms Business Partnership we are good at preaching to the converted. We're good at telling the people who love the Cairngorms how to love it more. We need to do more work on the new audience. But it's not just about messaging, it's not just about social media. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We've done some work on, as people arrive, can we update them as to what's full and what's busy? And we've had some interesting challenges with variable road signs and trying to make those work. But more importantly, we need to get people on the ground. Pre-lockdown, 13 partners had ranger services. We fund some of them. We've increased our grant to those. But we have, as the Park Authority, for the first time employed our own ranger service. So we currently have 5 permanent rangers and 9 seasonal rangers working across the National Park, supporting the family of rangers. We've also seen National Trust for Scotland, Forestry and Land Scotland, Nature Scotland, RSPB, all take on extra seasonal staff. We think we've got this summer double the staff we had on the ground, branded as rangers 2 years ago. And they need to be there. Our team this year so far, in the 22 weeks since Easter, have spoken to over 10,000 visitors. We reckon that's about 1%, face-to-face conversation. But sadly, in that same period, our ranger service have picked up over 500 black bin bags of rubbish, countryside rubbish. That's 22 bags a week. If we can move on to the next slide. And we have seen an increase in irresponsible behaviour. This is very much a personal take on it. I think we've had 25 years of festivals where you bought a low-cost tent and left it, and we've seen some of that. But what we've also seen is the ranger services, the land managers clearing up, because nothing encourages graffiti like seeing graffiti on a wall. So we have done collectively a great job in keeping the national park as tidy as we can. If we could move on to the next one. And we've kept communicating. We've kept sharing with each other what's going well and what needs to go better. And if we can move on to the next slide. We've also, and I think this has already been raised by Edward, seen the need for improving visitor infrastructure. This is a rural tourism infrastructure fund from Visit Scotland that we coordinated. You can now get a path for the first time from the Glenmore car park to the beach. We're also funding from our capital budget a range of partners developing car parks, toilets and camper van sites across the national park. And we are putting together a bid to RTIF for longer term funding. That's the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund. But there's no doubt if we want to improve the visitor experience and make it more responsible, we need to invest in infrastructure. Last slide, please. And I do want to highlight, yes, we've seen challenges, yes, we've seen difficult behaviour, but the vast majority of our visitors want to do the right thing. We don't have the evidence, but we have the opinion. We think, regardless of what happens with COVID, we are likely to see staycation. The Highlands particularly is a stunning area of Scotland, and the national park really does attract people. Our view is we will continue to need people on the ground. We will need rangers across the national park and other people. We do need clear, consistent and concise positive messaging. Whether you're on Forestry and Land Scotland or Glentanner Estate, we want to get the visitor to see the same message in the same way that they see the same road sign. And we do need better infrastructure. Perhaps leave you with one thought is that for 50 years, it's been illegal to drive a car intoxicated. Highland area has 450 people charged every year for that. So however good we do it, we're still going to need people on the ground managing these special places. That's all, but happy to take some questions.
Many thanks, Pete, for that great presentation. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions for Pete just at the moment? I'm not seeing any raised hands, and also I can't see anything new that's coming up in the chat just at the moment. I do have a question for you, Pete, myself. I totally acknowledge that no two locations are the same in terms of the outdoors in Scotland and the pressures that they might be facing. But if you were to give a little bit of advice and guidance, what do you think would be the top 3 recommendations or solutions for land managers who are suffering the additional pressures for the from visitor numbers, but they don't have the actual additional capacity or resources to draw upon for support? And I know that the support that the park is giving to the landowners and the land managers is tremendous, but if you were to give, should we say, your top 3 recommendations?
I think a lot of it is about this partnership working, and both national parks have a huge advantage in that we were designated 18, 19 years ago, so we've developed those partnerships. I think we've seen very positively rangers on the ground employed by local authorities in wider areas. Highland Council have additional rangers who haven't been working understandably in the Cairngorms, and so in Perth and Kinross Council. So I think coming back to what Edward said, I think the outdoor access forums are the key place to engage with both the local authorities, the access authority, in our case we're the access authority in the Cairngorms, but also that wider range of partners. And I think that as we come out of, well, we are out of lockdown, but as we continue to see visitors enjoying the countryside, the key way to get that partnership together is through the Outdoor Access Forum. That's probably one answer to 3 questions. I'm not sure I've done my job.
Is there anything practical, do you think, that you could suggest for any land managers out there who really don't have very much in the way of additional capacity or resources? Any quick wins?
Again, our experience is that even saying the vast majority, nearly everybody wants to do the right thing. So if there's somewhere on your land that it's very easy to have large capacity, if there's a path that's beautiful and well walked, if you can promote that, if you can encourage people to enjoy that, it's encouraging people to go where they can. And this data is years old. I used to work in forestry. Woodlands can take huge numbers of people without people seeing them. If you've got a woodland walk, the path can be busy, but no one sees it. And that's why we've done, since designation, we've done a tremendous amount of work on promoting those community paths, and a large majority of them. Over the last 18 months, we've not experienced overly busy community paths. There's lots of capacity there. I'll get the old logging way, the path from Aviemore to Glenmore, we've got a people counter on it. That takes 80,000 people a year. No one's told me it's too busy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. Then just moving on. Sorry, I've lost my reference paper here. So I'd like to introduce now Fiona Campbell, Chief Executive of the Association of Scotland Self-Caterers. Fiona was appointed to the ASSC as the first Chief Executive in February 2015, and she was charged with growing the association, which she's certainly done, recruiting new members, and ensuring that the member benefits are as comprehensive and as valuable as possible. In an ever-changing tourism landscape, and there's far more legislation, regulations, and business expenses appear on the horizon, the association, it finds itself increasingly politically engaged on a national and European level. Fiona works with key industry groups and stakeholders to support the representation, and also puts the ASSC at the forefront of the Scottish tourism industry, again, which I know she does incredibly well. And in addition, Fiona has also operated 2 holiday homes overlooking Loch Long in Argyll for the last 19 years. So she's, in the nicest way, double-headed. So, Fiona, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Simon. You're far too kind. I suppose we're all facing unprecedented challenges, but the single biggest challenge or threat to the self-catering and small accommodation provider sector is the proposed short-term let licensing scheme, as you alluded to earlier. In the excellent BBC sitcom Yes Minister, the eloquent Cabinet Secretary Sir Humphrey refers to politicians, sorry Edward, generating activity because it's their substitute for achievement. I was reminded of this recently when I was thinking about the latest developments in the Scottish Government's handling of short-term lets, because while ministers have been very active, they've achieved practically nothing. Now, the Association of Scotland Self-Caterers welcomed the Scottish Government's withdrawal of its original licensing order in the previous parliamentary session, recognising that it contained deficiencies and unintended consequences, and that the assurance that they would engage with industry through the working group to respond to industry concerns and suggest changes to the legislation. Very sadly, this turned out to be mere lip service. The Scottish Government has completely failed to live up to this most simple promise and are going ahead with this folly practically unchanged. One of my local MSPs described the regulations as tantamount to going after a fly with a bazooka, which I thought was rather poetic. In fact, as if to add to an unneeded punchline to a joke nobody laughed at, the Scottish Government has proceeded to expand the number of tourist accommodation businesses that are going to be hampered by this licensing. As things stand, the revised proposals will make life even more difficult for self-caterers, as well as our friends in the B&B sector, glamping, and some guest houses. It's because of this failure to listen to industry, local authority and law society concerns that the ASSC, along with industry colleagues, decided to resign from the Scottish Government's short-term let working group earlier in the year, well, a month ago or so. Despite being proactive and willing to take on all of these issues with initiative at every step of the process, we've been met with nothing but blockages and a lack of understanding. Just to clarify, the ASSC is not against regulation, for our sector is already regulated. It is, however, against bad legislation. We absolutely share concerns about the impact of tourism in general on local communities and the impact specifically of holiday lets. It's for this reason that in 2017, we called for mandatory registration with health and safety, plus licensing in areas where there's a demonstrable link between self-catering properties or short-term lets and loss of housing stock. This would have provided local authorities with real-time empirical data to understand the scale of the activity, while also ensuring that all accommodation providers adhere to existing health and safety regulations. This suggestion was completely ignored in 2017, and now we're faced with this alternative proposal. Unfortunately, the current proposals for licensing of all short-term lets is founded on little more than anecdote, often provided by localised pressure groups rather than through objective surveying and empirical data. The Scottish Government has ignored data provided illustrating the reality of the professional self-catering sector, which represents £867 million of direct visitor spend to the Scottish economy and supports almost 24,000 full-time jobs. Further, as your chief executive pointed out, your policy advisor Simon pointed out recently, the Scottish Government's data underpinning these proposals ignored anything north of Fort William, excluding 1/3 of Scotland's landmass. In a survey that we conducted last year on the proposals, which elicited nearly 1,200 responses, around 1/3 of businesses would be rendered unviable if the current proposals for the licensing order are introduced. Nearly half would leave the self-catering sector entirely if the proposed licensing scheme was introduced. And of those, 33% would leave those properties empty or use them solely for family and friends. Respondents also suggested that the impact of the regulations wouldn't be limited to self-catering alone. Indeed, it will also entail negative knock-on effects for supply chains such as hospitality, local activity providers, and attractions. 66% thought it would have a detrimental impact on guests. Amid the maelstrom of scapegoating, political opportunism, and sheer bloody-minded ignorance that has been kicked around to do with short-term lets, specifically those let out on certain collaborative economy platforms that we won't mention, lies an industry that we are rightfully proud of. Kate Forbes has also suggested that short-term let discussion should be focused on facts rather than unfounded fears. We agree, and here's a few examples. According to recent research, as I've said, self-catering is worth £867 million to the Scottish economy each year. So it's absolutely baffling as to why the Scottish Government seems so intent on crippling such a vital and valuable sector, especially at a time when small businesses need as much support as they can get. Moreover, the sector is especially important in rural areas where this negative impact will be felt most severely. Self-catering has been a key part of the Highland economy for decades, and it brings with it a raft of other economic and social benefits to this wonderful part of Scotland. Faced with the prospect of handing over more than £1,500 for a licence, as estimated by the Society of Local Authority Lawyers and Administrators in Scotland, nearly half of these businesses are seriously contemplating shutting down forever. It really is this serious. The Scottish Government's licensing scheme represents the worst kind of one-size-fits-all, scattergun, sledgehammer to crack a nuts kind of thinking that will have far more negative unintended consequences than it has perceived benefits, especially for small and micro tourism businesses. So what's the solution? Always looking at the positive, always being constructive. Since 2017, we have proactively and constructively offered empirical data and policy recommendations to the Scottish Government to protect professional self-caterers and other small accommodation providers, which is a backbone of Scottish tourism, the length and breadth of the country. As a compromise, now, rather than proposing to completely replace the current draft licensing order, which the Scottish Government considers to be a sensible idea, the ASSC has proposed to amend Article 3 to provide that an activity is exempt from the licence requirement if it is registered accommodation. And the registration conditions, essentially the existing mandatory licensing conditions, are complied with. This could be very easily delivered tomorrow by the Development of Tourism Act 1969 with no additional legislation required whatsoever. In other words, as I say, we could do this tomorrow. The SSC has also helped to develop a digital solution that would be offered to the Scottish Government with no charge whatsoever to administer the scheme. This would protect professional businesses whilst also meeting the policy objectives related to health and safety. We've real and significant concerns that legitimate and already regulated business owners will suffer significant financial loss if these proposals are made law, and it will materially damage the tourism industry in Scotland. We also have concerns that this legislation is legally precarious, and we have highlighted that to the Scottish Government. It's hugely regrettable that we've now found that engagement with the working group has been nothing more than window dressing. We've seen no evidence whatsoever that the Scottish Government is listening to concerns from those who actually understand the industry or properly considered alternative proposals. It is the responsibility of our elected policymakers to deliver good laws. This is not a good law. We've been assured that legislation will be monitored and evaluated. This is completely disingenuous given the lack of baseline data. To suggest that we can amend this SSI later is like suggesting that we send HMY Britannia off to sea, knowing it has holes in the hull. We all know what happened at RMS Titanic. The ASSC fully supports a sustainable tourism industry in Scotland, and we've offered meaningful and workable solutions to the various concerns. It is time that this legislation is reconsidered in light of honesty, transparency and accountability in order to get the balance right between the needs of communities and our vital tourism industry. In the Scottish Tourism Alliance's contribution to the development of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, they recommend that to allow businesses to recover from COVID, a commitment to only fair and proportionate legislation is required, which does not risk placing any additional burden on businesses at this critical stage. If we are to recover from COVID-19 and have a tourism industry worth saving, the Scottish Government should listen to industry and support our calls for a more tailored, sensible and practical mandatory registration scheme with health and safety provisions. Doing so would encourage best practice, which the overwhelming majority of self-caterers already put into place each and every day to avoid penalising the hard-working professionals who work tirelessly to help people have memorable making holidays from Orkney to the Scottish borders. As Scotland emerges from COVID-19, sectors across the Scottish economy will be faced with real challenges and difficulties, ranging from consumer confidence to the attractiveness of investment. The last thing, especially for a sector as important as self-catering, that any government should do is impose costly, restrictive and damaging restrictions. We've seen what the government does when it goes for activity. Now let's see some achievement. Scottish Land and Estates has been incredibly supportive throughout this process, representing its members vocally and intelligently at the heart of these discussions. I can't thank them enough. And for those of you who have written to your elected representatives, thank you. If you haven't, feel free to do so. Edward expects more letters. If you have self-catering as part of your diversified business and would like to support the ASSC in this huge battle that will affect so many, we'd love to welcome you. The last 18 months has illustrated what sector organisations can do to support individual businesses, sectors and one another. And if there's any positives that can be found over the last 18 months, that is surely one of them. I'm more than happy to answer any questions about this. I know it's a very, very complicated subject, but yeah, over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Fiona, for a very detailed and quite rightly so passionate presentation there. You and I have been working on this quite a lot, I think, over the recent weeks. And indeed, the potential implications of the licensing order, if it were to go forward, would be dramatic in the extreme for the short-term lets industry. Has anybody got any immediate questions for Fiona before we move on to the next speaker? We can always have more questions later in the Q&A session. I haven't seen anything. Very, very quickly, Fiona, just a very quick for me. If the registration scheme were to go ahead, as per the proposal that was originally drafted in 2017, is there any idea on what the cost of that would be for operators?
It would be more akin to landlord's registration, which currently stands at £82. So you're talking less than 100 compared to 1,500 to 2,000. And the Scottish Government does keep saying that licensing will only be between £233 and £377 for a licence. We have no idea what that's based on, and we have absolutely no confidence that that is the case. So we're talking about a difference between under 100 and up to 2,000. So it's a significant issue.
Okay. All right, thanks very much for that. I see Fiona has just come up with a question, what's next in short-term lets? If we can pick that up just at the end of the main Q&A session, Fiona, because I don't want us to run too far behind on the presentation schedule. So thank you once again, Fiona, for that great presentation. Moving on, we'll now hear from Jordan Hewitt. Jordan is the head of brand and content at VisitScotland. He's been in the tourism industry for 15 years and most recently joining VisitScotland to lead their brand and content department. For the past 10 years, Jordan's worked in the airline industry, leading marketing teams at Etihad Airways and also British Airways. Most recently developed the COVID-19 global response for Etihad Airways and Abu Dhabi. Prior to this, Jordan worked in New York and London for Visit Britain, and working in a variety of marketing and partnership roles. So it's got lots of partnership working experience here. So, Jordan, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come along and present today. So when speaking to Simon, this is very much about giving you an overview of what the Visitor Management Group has done. It's very much our collective marketing approach, and giving you an idea of what our response was to some of the issues that we've covered today. So we move on to the next slide. The group itself was set up in September 2020, and it was set up in response to a number of the issues that we heard today. And it really was around how do we coordinate our communication efforts across the industry to deal with a lot of the issues head on that were arising with what was a very busy summer for domestic tourism. So with ourselves as Visit Scotland and all the partners that you see there, the group was launched in September to encourage greater access to and enjoyment of Scotland's outdoors through establishing a relationship with the consumer to respect, protect and enjoy Scotland. When the group was brought together, it was very much brought together and the task was clear to align our communications material along with the strategy of the Visitor Management Group, including briefing organisations of the efforts of the group. We were also, a big requirement was recognising that lots of the different partners within the group is to map and agree the audiences and the issues that were arising. Off the back of that was very much to develop common messaging, recognising that there was lots of different messaging out in market and making sure we had common messaging for what Visit Scotland was saying, as well as partners were saying on their websites, to have a united front when speaking to audiences. To coordinate our communications, recognising that we were all communicating to similar audiences. How do we coordinate that in a much more timely fashion and make a much more targeted fashion, and then ensuring that we take on actions and tasks agreed by the steering group in ensuring that we have the destination information available, promoting that responsible behaviour which wasn't potentially seen last summer, and promoting guidance and good practice. So as the group established, and across the sort of the first few months of the group, it was really establishing what the key themes were and the key issues that we needed to attack head on. So we move on to the next slide. You'll see here 10 issues that really were the driving force of the group, and the key themes that were identified across all partners that needed a lot more focus and a lot more education in terms of the audiences that were currently using a lot of these themes. So as the group established, the key themes that we really took on board initially, on top of the ones that you see here, were very much around a focus on litter, motorhoming responsibly, water safety, wildlife and pet safety, land usage, and wild camping. And although we had the other issues, these are the ones that we really focused on to start with, to really get those messages out. I think what the group recognised at the start, and moving on to the next slide, was actually it was a big role for the group to ensure actually a coordinated effort. There was a recognition in the group that actually these themes were quite varied and needed, an approach that was going to tackle not only the specifics, but also a bigger and much broader theme of, respect and protect and enjoy when people are outdoors and enjoying Scotland. So what we did is all partners were absolutely integral to this approach. Is we had a hero, hub and hygiene approach, which I'm sure you've all heard of before, recognising that we did need to do a mass piece of awareness activity to inspire and engage people to change behaviour when they were outdoors and exploring Scotland. Complementing that, we did recognise also from a hub perspective that actually the audience has significantly changed, as we heard earlier, that we needed to actually change our approach. Maybe people didn't want to hear from Visit Scotland, they didn't want to hear from national parks. They want to hear from audiences that you're used to. So we had to build communities of advocates and really have an approach where we could actually be much more relatable, especially to a younger audience. And then our hygiene. Hygiene is super important. We've got a lot of activity that takes place, and we need to make sure that our key messages were aligned not only at Visit Scotland, but with all of the partners in terms of the information we were communicating when it came to waterways, when it came to litter, etc. And that was really the fruits of the team. It was a partnership approach, all partners working together collaboratively to try and build a campaign that portrayed the respect, protect, and joy, and influenced a change in behaviour from the behaviour that we'd seen last summer. So the next few slides is just going to talk through the approach that we took and just give you an idea of what happened. And very much this is the start of a journey that we're on at the moment. So the first thing to do was, as we said, align our messaging. So we created brand agnostic campaign assets, which could be used by all the partners and all the industry in Scotland. So we created a number of assets, print, out of home, digital, etc., that could be downloaded across the industry to really get that messaging out there around the key themes. So that toolkit's available today on VisitScotland.org and is regularly updated with new themes as they arise. As mentioned, we needed a bit of a change in behaviour. So the first action was to do a big hero campaign, and not only doing a pre-travel campaign through the means of social and digital when people are out there searching, but also really doing some on-ground, on-territory activity to just remind people when they're on territory to mind their behaviour in terms of what they might do with pets, litter, etc. Very much that recall when visiting. So with the hero campaign, that was then complemented by the next slide, which was really around how do we influence a much younger demographic. Apologies, that's the next slide. Continuing on our hero campaign, and just before I get to the next slide, we did further this summer do an STV partnership. So recognising that we've done quite a big piece of activity in terms of mass awareness across Scotland, we, just on that previous slide, we did team up with STV to make sure across the summer, when people were out there engaging, that we had our approach very much at the forefront of people's minds when they're out there exploring and when they're watching TV. So it was a 4-week partnership, and we had content-led communications, not only coming from visitors, but coming from landowners talking about what responsible tourism is and really making it real. And again, that hero messaging complemented with the other activity that we're doing really does that mass audience and trying to get people to change behaviour and think responsibly about travelling around Scotland. And with that, we did some Scott Pulse research, and we can send the slides out later, just looking at what people's trip intention and what statements people agreed or disagreed with when exploring Scotland. This was pre the partnership, and we're doing some post-analysis results now, which we'll be able to share out. So talking about new audiences and stepping away from slightly broader approach when we're looking for a change behaviour, the next slide demonstrates just some of the activity that took place, recognising that we had a much younger demographic, not so educated potentially on the outdoors. And to relate to these audiences, we did feel that we couldn't go alone. We needed to be in relevant channels to really influence that audience. So through some partnerships with the likes of BBC Social, the Hebrew and Baker, using TikTok, etc., we were able to be able to find influencers who were able to talk to younger audiences and really demonstrate a more relatable content of how to camp responsibly, what to do with litter, what to do with fires. And we saw, some really good sort of results from that activity. One I would like to highlight was Ramblers Scotland. They did a fantastic piece of work, recognising the need to get to a very young demographic, working with the TikTok star Littlest Chicken, a fantastic campaign that they delivered. But again, quite tongue-in-cheek, but it was very relevant to a younger demographic that certainly we needed to see a step change in. Moving on to the next slide, this is very much just around the hygiene, making sure that if people are going to go out there and explore Scotland, making sure we've got our hygiene there. We continually update the toolkit on VisitScotland.org to make sure that the industry has the toolkit and the assets available for promoting safe and responsible travel throughout Scotland, and that's updated regularly. We have a bi-monthly steering group, which is the working group, and a bi-monthly steering group and a bi-weekly working group, who are constantly speaking with each other, looking at the issues on the ground, and we're constantly updating those assets to make sure it's reflecting some of the issues we're seeing across this summer. We have our always on strategy. So if people are looking to go in the outdoors, if they're considering travel around Scotland, we're targeting them with messaging to say, do it responsibly, trying to steer people away sometimes from the hotspots and steering them towards the little less expected. We've seen some really key themes this summer, as I'm sure you're all aware, and we've seen in the news, around wild swimming and stand-up paddleboarding. So we've done a lot more longer form content, trying to explain to people how to do this safely, especially when it comes to locks and talking about the depths, etc. So we've had some much longer form content, which we've seen some really good results on, to really drive that consideration for responsible waters this summer. And constantly working with the partners in the group, we're always updating editorial content as restrictions change, as information around waterways change. We're always updating the content on VisitScotland.com in partnership with our partners to ensure it's aligned and we have a consistent approach with ourselves at Visit Scotland and the industry. And moving on to the next slide, I suppose this is very much a starter and responding to what happened last summer and really making sure we've got those key messages out there across this summer. This is very much the start of the journey, and as I think it was alluded to at the beginning, we need to do a lot in terms of the education, and that remains a key hot topic of the group going forward, to look at how we can educate younger demographics and make sure that the responsible tourism angle is embedded either in schools or embedded across key forums. Across our upcoming activity, we're not going to lose sight of the challenges that are in market. The visitor management group meets regularly and will constantly meet with the group to find core themes for delivering content and making sure we're getting that messaging out there around responsible tourism and respect, protect and enjoy Scotland. Our domestic campaign continues for the next couple of months with a new campaign coming in September, October, really talking about Scotland's calling, but calling in a responsible way. We'll continue to work with partners in our always on approach, so targeting across key themes. As we get into winter, the themes will slightly change, so making sure that we're out there with the themes early on before people are considering getting out there in the winter. And again, working in partnership, not just with our individual partners that we work with at Visit Scotland on joint marketing campaigns, but all the partners within the visitor management group to make sure that we are continually getting the messaging out. And as international travel starts to come back very slowly, we are looking at how we can embed these responsible tourism messages into our international activity. So some of that is quite directed in terms of some of the film content that will be going out. Others will be less direct in terms of partnerships with like National Geographic, who are trying to embed that responsible tourism agenda into educated and non-educated audiences. So just to sort of summarize, the group's done a lot to identify the key themes and find a way of trying to change behaviour, and it could only be done through the partnership of the group and working as a collective response in our marketing communication to really put a step change out in the market in Scotland when people are exploring. And initial feedback this summer is we've definitely seen an improvement. We've definitely seen better behaviour, but we all know there's a long way to go in terms of continuing this work. So thank you very much. If you have any questions or want any further information on the campaign, we'll be happy to send that on.
Sorry, almost at the schoolboy era there for forgetting to unmute myself. Jordan, thank you very much for an incredibly detailed and very informative presentation there. There's a lot of data coming across. I just got one question for you before we get into the wider sort of Q&A session. I and many other people are aware that the typical 18 to 30-year-old, shall we say, always music festival attendees that have been unable to attend events this year. So a great number, many of them have been heading to the outdoors with very little idea of what's meant by responsible access. They continue to bring their take it with you and leave it behind attitude to the countryside. To what extent have you used prominent social media influencers from within the music festival sector to actually reach out to those sort of people this year?
So I think at the moment we've touched very lightly on the, engaging with a much younger demographic, and we've done that through forums like BBC Social, TikTok, etc. Little's Chicken, as I mentioned in the presentation. I think we've got a long way to go, and as the music festivals and start to come back, we need to really need to focus on what we're going to do to engage that audience. I think it's not an audience we're hugely familiar with or we've targeted in the past, where, you know, we recognised that the demographic that we had coming and, you know, certainly exploring VisitScotland.com was, you know, a slightly older demographic. So I think having recognised now that we are getting a much younger demographic, we're actually changing the way that we, you know, display our content on VisitScotland.com to much more concise content. Also doing a lot more film content, so trying to get a lot more sort of content that's sort of short form that can get the messages across. We do need to work much harder, and we recognise that, and it's part of the strategy with other influencers to try and attract that, you know, get those messages across to that younger demographic.
So it's that there hasn't actually been as yet a distinct focus on sort of targeting the 18 to 30 festival goers so far, but that's to come.
I think we've done it. I think we've done it broadly because, you know, in terms of some of the channels that we've reached out to. But if we're going right down the music festival route, that's not something we've done at that stage, and it's definitely something we can look at and take on board.
Okay, all right, thanks, Jordan. There's just a few questions going back on the chat session before we open the floor a little bit more widely, because I don't want to lose these. Jane Miller-Muirhead. Jane has asked, how do we break the notion of right to roam? That soundbite, I think, is the biggest challenge today. I know that's this notion that nowhere in Scotland is off limit to the public, where we know this isn't, of course. Of course, right to roam isn't an accepted, well, we know of the term, but it refers directly to England, Wales and Countryside Act, whereas we have the right to responsible access. I don't know, Mark from Nature Scut, I don't know if you wanted to just comment on that from our other panel. Mark, right.
Okay, yes, thanks, Simon. Yes, I think it's a point to raise, and I think that phrase has been a bit of a bugbear for many years. I think the difficulty is it's snappy, alliterative and media friendly, and now the cat's out of the bag. It's quite widely used, and it's very difficult to reverse that trend. I think certainly the view that we've taken through the National Access Forum has been very much that the appropriate terminology is a right of responsible access, which is absolutely what we're talking about here. And I think much as we'd perhaps like to be able to reverse the usage of the right to roam phrase and turn back the clock, I don't think we'll be able to do that. I think what we have to emphasize instead is positive promotion of the term right of responsible access and an understanding of the responsibilities that come with access rights.
Jane, does that answer your question, or do you want to drill a little deeper?
Yeah, I quite agree. I think it is a soundbite that is going to live with us for a very long time. And unfortunately, for us on the ground, landowners, farmers, whomever, it is a huge, huge pain when we have people rocking up in areas where they have absolutely no right to be, and yet they always say, first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I have the right to roam, I have the right to go wherever I want. And actually trying to politely, after 10 times in one day, it does wear on you. It is that, I mean, I've had stages where I've actually printed off the Act, highlighted it in yellow to say, this is actually the access code. This is what you should be adhering to. And I've had it ripped up in my face and told I have got no idea what I'm talking about. And if I'm not going to speak properly, I shouldn't be having any conversations with them. I've been verbally abused over it. I have been assaulted in one case over it by an 83-year-old woman, which was very disconcerting because part of me just wanted to lamp her back, but I didn't. So yes, it is this soundbite that has been used on the television that has just caused, I personally think, a huge problem for us on the coalface, having to deal with the public who are accessing the land. Again, I have no problems with people if they do it responsibly and if they do it in a manner where it benefits everybody, not just themselves. And I think that's a huge problem we have. There is this part of the public, I'm not saying it's everyone, but there is a huge part of the public that have this phrase in their head, and as far as they're concerned, everybody else's rights are out the window, and the only person whose rights that matter is their own. And that, I think, is detrimental in a lot of ways. And I'm unsure of how we educate these people into thinking it's responsible access and not this right to roam wherever they want. That's my rant over, guys.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Jane. Thank you very much. And what you've just said is been echoed by so many other landowners, land managers over weeks and weeks and weeks. Edward, I saw that you put your hand up there. I think Paul, I'll come to you in just a second. Edward, I think you were first to come up.
I think it comes back down to the original point of that I'm so keen on is educating people about what actually things mean. You know, we can talk about responsible access, but is responsible access running your dog through a field of sheep that are about to start lambing? Probably not, but you know, that took a good 25 minutes to discuss at a committee meeting whether you should have a sign on every field to say that the sheep are about to lamb. You know, how you do that on 30,000 acres when they're roaming the hill, God only knows. But, you know, politicians get confused by it as well. So I would say it's about educating people. And I think that's why we need to educate people not only about the current code, but also about what the code means. And the best way to do that, I still hold, is by telling our children and explaining our children, because our children probably sometimes are a lot less dogmatic, if that's the right expression, or a lot more reasonable than some adults who've misconceived what the meaning about responsible access is.
Thank you, Edward. Paul, you raised your hand there. Did you want to come in? Question.
Yeah, I've typed it in as well. In my long and distant past as a youth, I'm from Englandshire, by the way, Scotland's biggest county, I might add. We had the countryside code out on television constantly for everybody to see as a public information section. Why can't that be reintroduced up here to help and assist up here? Is there any reason why that can't happen?
Well, the countryside code, as you said, is based upon England and Wales. I think possibly the main limiting factor for the amount of publicity could be monetary, and how much money Visit Scotland actually has to contribute to that. I don't know. Jordan, on the publicity side, did you want to have any comments?
Well, Visit Scotland have done an absolutely sterling job, I must add, with their adverts that they have put following COVID and promoting Scotland again and telling people, yes, we're open, come and visit us, come and see us. But there is not just Visit Scotland. There is the local authorities, central government, the National Park Authority, etc., etc. All of these putting together, surely something could be done on terrestrial television.
So I'm happy to respond on that. I think, thank you for the compliment to Visit Scotland, but you know, there's obviously a lot of activity has taken place, and I think what we've done in the last year is very much, you know, try to grab some of the core themes and some of the core issues that we've seen out there to try and tackle them head on. I think, you know, the visitor management group, the reason that it is there is to try and take these core issues and come up with responses of how we educate. I would say that terrestrial TV is not always the solution. I think looking at some of the audiences, we need to look at a number of channels to try and get that message out. But what we'll do is I'll take that you know, the back to the group and look at how we can respond at having a more larger awareness of that topic.
Thank you, Jordan. Mark, you raised your hand. Do you just want to come in on that?
Yes, thanks, Simon. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay there. I only just discovered how to raise my hand digitally, but
you can always physically wave if you're on the screen.
yes, okay. Yes, I think it's a good point there, and I think the certainly our own monitoring of awareness of the code was demonstrating that general public level awareness of the basic principles of the code and the existence of the code was tailing off since we ran our TV ad campaign, which we last ran in the late noughties. But what we've been doing since then is moving increasingly towards social media, which has now allowed us to open up a much broader front for promoting these campaigns. It's not just run on social media. We also use work through conventional, traditional media. And what we're particularly trying to do now, particularly in response to the experience during COVID and this new audience that's starting to visit the outdoors that people have already referred to, is to increasingly target high-level messages about the existence of the code, the need for responsible behavior, and the key principles of the code at a very broad audience. And so far, that's that campaign. It's ongoing, but to the end of July, it's so far generated around 10 million impressions on social media this year and driven about 37,000 visits to the Scottish Outdoor Access Code website. But that's an ongoing task. And as Jordan said, that ties in with all the activity that partners are undertaking as well. So there is a lot of activity out there to try and get this message across. I think it is also worth picking up on the point about schools, which I think is incredibly well made, and we recognise that that's really important. It's not a new audience for us. We've been trying to work with schools for a long time, and it can be very challenging because the curriculum is very congested, and finding the space for our messages isn't always easy. And it's been particularly difficult over the last 18 months or so because of the position schools have been in during COVID. But this is very much on our radar now, and it's certainly something that we want to pick up moving forward to try and engage schools much more fundamentally in access education and promotion of the code. And I think it probably needs to go beyond just the detailed and specific messages about the content of the code and try and work towards something a bit more fundamental and try and encourage an ethos of care and responsibility. And the high-level messages, the key principles of the code are already there to do that. I think it's finding ways to convey that and rising to that challenge that is what we really now have to do.
Mark, thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. Thank you. I'm just going down through the other questions on the chat. I see, Paul, you asked a question, which I think Pete Crane answered, the toilets. Fiona Metz, which I think Fiona Campbell has answered, and also Edward. Jamie Muirhead, where are you seeing the change of behaviour if the CMPO lifted 500 plus black bags of litter? It would appear it's not there. And Paul showed the number of refuse sacks lifted is not enough infrastructure. There's a common theme coming up here, the word infrastructure. Pete again has commented on there. So a lot of these questions have been answered already in the chat, which is great. So then everybody can read those. Are there any other questions for any of the panelists at all? Anybody wish to raise any points or any other questions? Pete.
Yeah, I just want to come back to staff on the ground. Certainly the ranger service that we employ this summer, both full-time and seasonal, have been managing for visitors. They've been out there on the ground. But as we go into autumn, there will be less need for that. And that's one of the areas where we see the rangers have some capacity to raise awareness of responsible access, and particularly with primary pupils, where a ranger can go in and meet the pupils and do a very, I suppose, very engaging a couple of hours, encouraging them to in our case, to love the Cairngorms and to look after it, and encouraging mum, dad and granddad to do that. And I think that even in the 21st century, where we rely on social media, we shouldn't forget that face-to-face communication with people who've done the job can be much more memorable, and I'm going to use an old word, than the tweet they didn't read half an hour ago. So we're very keen, again, to use rangers and staff on the ground to engage with a younger audience.
Thank you, Pete. That's very, very valuable to sort of sum up an addition there. That's very helpful. Sorry, was it? No, okay. I saw the hand come up again and it was down. Okay. I got a question here for Fiona, and I don't know whether I'm putting you slightly on the spot here, maybe, and it's perhaps also a comment. It's recently announced that there's over 47,000, I think it is, empty properties across Scotland that could potentially be improved and made available for social housing. And this is at a time when, I think it was the last couple of days, Scottish Government has announced it's so far behind its own target of delivering affordable housing. It spent less than 50% of its £25 million budget to build affordable homes. So, in an odd sort of way, do you think the Scottish Government's licensing proposals are a way of potentially releasing some short-term accommodation into the long-term sector to relieve the pressure on the housing that's being sought to be delivered? And sorry, second part to the question as well. It's also been suggested that the short-term licensing, or it could be the backdoor route to tourism tax. Do you think that's the case?
Absolutely good point. So point one is that in 2020, the housing minister at the time, Kevin Stewart, assured us that this was all to do with basic health and safety, and that everybody should be up to the same standard, which we absolutely agree with. The point is that health and safety regulations already exist for the self-catering sector, B&Bs, et cetera, It's just really, the concern was amateur. There isn't a differentiator between professional businesses and amateurs who let out their property on, I'm going to say, Airbnb. So that was what we were first originally told was the intention behind the licensing proposals. That over the course of a year and a half has changed completely. And now a lot of MSPs are writing to their constituents saying that it's to do with housing stock. And as you say, if you look at the actual statistics and actual empirical data, there are 18,000 there or thereabouts self-catering units on non-domestic rates in Scotland. There are 45,000 empty homes that have been empty for 6 months. There's 90,500 empty homes if you include properties that have been unoccupied for 12 months. So that's 90,500 empty homes compared to 18,000 self-catering units, and 24,500 second homes. Now, second homes are useless. They're useless to communities, they're useless to local economies. But yes, we are being blamed for the housing crisis, which is exhausting because we simply aren't. We are an integral part of communities the length and breadth of Scotland and bring huge benefits. But yes, so we are being scapegoated in terms of the housing crisis, and we are already regulated in terms of health and safety. This is really being targeted at amateur operators on collaborative economy platforms, Airbnb being the primary one. That's the first part. The second part, yes, we all know that tourist tax is going to come back and bite us. We absolutely know it is. It's been taken off the table because of COVID, but they're still insistent on this preposterous licensing proposal. Our thought on the subject of tourism taxes, it's not necessarily a terrible thing as long as it's ring-fenced to actually then benefit tourism providers and communities. But the fact is, if it's then churned into the black hole of local authorities, that's no good. That's not good enough. It has to materially benefit the tourism sector. So our proposal is, how do you know who you're going to tourism tax if you don't have a register of all accommodation providers? Don't forget, there is no accommodation register for hotels or bed and breakfast or anybody else. We need a national register of all tourism accommodation providers, and that would underpin a tourism tax. But that tourism tax has to be focused and targeted to benefit local communities and the tourism industry. Does that answer your question?
Yes, we don't have all the answers, but yes, thanks for the summary on that. I don't know, Edward, did you want to come in at all on that as an MSP?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to speak to Fiona again, suggesting that more people write me letters. I've been responding to letters on this subject for months.
Sorry.
Let me be clear just on this, is that there is a problem with housing in Scotland. We need more houses. That's what the problem is. And what we have is a government that seems to be delving into a problem that isn't actually the cause of the problem. So, you know, if we build more houses, that would resolve the undersupply. We have a letting market based on a PRT system, which actually makes it significantly unpleasant for landlords to actually consider letting, because they can't ever get their property back except for 3 reasons. And then we have a system which is based on EPCs, which is a surveyor who did EPCs, you know, which demands landlords get properties up to a certain energy proficiency, which is absolute rubbish. Let me give you an example. I did an EPC, looked at an EPC on a house the other day, that actually it made more sense to put LED light bulbs in the house than double glazing. Now, how does that make the house better for somebody to live in? There are so many problems with the housing. We need to delve down into it and not try and just make some short-term headlines that I think we're getting out of this. And I think Fiona quoted a Yes Minister comment. Let me quote another one back. That civil servants in this case have an extraordinary genius of wrapping up a simple idea to make it extremely complicated. And I'll add on my bit to the end, which is often beyond the ministers and government officials to understand. And that's where we're at. We've got a system that no one quite knows what it's trying to achieve. It's not addressing the problem, but it makes a good political soundbite. And it truthfully, having been involved in the industry for over 25 years, I find deeply frustrating, deeply annoying, and all about political gain, not about gaining housing for people who really need it.
Thank you, Edward. Very impassioned, and yes, yeah, a lot of it that I totally agree with. Thank you. Lots of other comments that have come in as well, most of which I think are just comments or they're being answered by others in the chat, which is great. Are there any other questions at all from those present? I mean, I know we said we were going to be finishing at 11:30, but all of our speakers have said that they're available for longer if necessary, if there are any further questions or want the discussion to continue. I'm not seeing any other hands go up. Just in the chat. Right, well, thank you very much. I mean, I've made a few comments here, and with regard to particularly around access in the outdoors. I've underlined at the top the word investment, which and I'm sort of picking up on keywords here that have been repeated as we go through as we've been through this event. And under investments, I've got people, education, infrastructure, messaging, partnerships, and information. And it's a recognition that there's a lot of investment that's potentially needed going forward to get the messaging out, right messaging at the right levels, in the right places, at the right tone of voice. And I don't see that it's that there's a quick fix there, but what I'm hoping is that there will be a sustained effort from all those parties who are involved with and can influence these areas to enable us to go forward on that. And then from Fiona as well is the impact on the short-term sector, potentially dramatic impact for all the short-term let operators. There's conflict with Scottish Government government messages that are coming out saying, look at all the money we're putting into tourism, and the proposals for the short term lets could in actual fact be, yes, welcome, come to Scotland, because it's places for you to stay. And that's just going to have other impacts on distributing the problems elsewhere where those people are coming to stay. And again, it's around finding solutions. I want to say thank you very much to everybody who's been here as guests to listen to the speakers. And personally, I'd like to thank Edward Mountain, Pete Crane, Fiona Campbell, and Jordan Hewitt for there. Alan Dron, we didn't hear from you, Alan, but I know you're there. So thank you very much for being on now there from VisitScotland. Should there have been any questions, and Mark Reitman from Nature Scott, thank you for being here as well and your contributions. So thank you for joining. Hope you found it's helpful and informative, and many of your questions have been answered. And I wish you well for the future, for your businesses, whatever they may be. And if you've enjoyed the event, please consider joining another Scottish Land and Estates event in the coming weeks. All the details are on our website. We've got our flagship annual conference coming up on the 29th of September, and the principal topic there is climate change. So please do take a look at that on our website. And if you've got any questions, then please come through to myself or Jane at SLE. We will be sending out feedback surveys shortly, so please be as kind or as brutal as you feel appropriate. And all our past webinars as well. They can all be viewed on our website in our members area. So there's quite a few there now. So if you wish to sort of delve in and pick and choose, we've got podcasts on there as well. So you can listen while driving if you would rather not listen to the radio or other stations that are available. So thank you once again, everybody. And in particular to those who've given up their time and seen great value in being here today as presenters. So thank you, everybody, very much.